Welcome to Confessions of a Wannabe It Girl. I'm your host, Marley Freygang, and I'm here to help you filter out all the bullshit and become the next It Girl. This podcast explores the reality of what it really takes to make it out there. As it turns out, it is way less Instagrammable than I thought it was going to be. I'm still very much a work in progress, but there's simply nothing else I'd rather be doing than chasing my dreams. So let's learn from my mistakes and work together to achieve our dreams with more confidence, clarity, and direction. Let's get after it. Well, welcome, Sami. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Marley. Thank you for having me. I am so excited to talk to you and your listeners today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to talk to you too. You are a certified life coach, a podcaster that really helps teens manage anxiety and overwhelm and work on becoming self-confident. So I am very intrigued by this topic we're going to dive into. It's a sort of touched, untouched, but spoken about thing. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you mentioned in a podcast that you, like many other girls, have struggled to find themselves, dealt with anxiety, depression, and constantly comparing yourself to others. Something we talk a lot about on this podcast. And, you know, as we go from being girls to women to girls to young women to women, something we as women face is this beauty standard and this worth being placed in our desirability. And how do you think this became so present in our society and why?
Yeah, so such a good question. As a teen, I struggled with a lot of anxiety. Even as an adult, I struggle with anxiety. Same. And, just trying to search for answers and figure myself out. And then, I have 4 kids now and I have 2 teen girls and I'm like, whoa, wait a second. You are not doing to yourself what I did to myself.
Yeah.
And really being like, okay, I've got to raise my girls differently. I got to teach my girls how to think differently, how to, manage the world around them so they don't grow up, how I did, where I didn't like myself and I didn't love myself. And I had a lot of anxiety because I did not really know how to love myself. And I think nowadays it's so easy to look around and compare yourself with everybody else around you, especially on social media. We have that concentrated, such a concentrated amount to see other girls, to see other bodies, to see what other people are doing on vacation. And it's very normal to compare. That's actually like a primal instinct that we have. And comparison is really how we've evolved and how we've survived. Like if you think of buildings, like when we build buildings, we are constantly comparing different structures and what holds better. And like, oh, this roof collapsed on people. Well, maybe we should do it this way.
That's not a
right?
good one. Yeah.
Right. Like comparison has really allowed us to become a better species. And it's an essential part of who we are and how we've survived and evolved. But when it comes to comparison with ourselves and somebody else, we tend to take it to this next level where we're like, I can't be happy unless I have that. Or I can't be happy unless I look like her, or I can't be happy unless that boy chooses me. And so we take it to this unhealthy level where then we're like, oh, if I'm not chosen, or if my body doesn't look like that, then I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or, I might as well just stay in my room and scroll social media because nobody likes me or I don't fit in. Right. Mm-hmm. And those are the problems we run into when we compare ourselves and then take it to the next level where we're like, I can't be happy unless I have that.
Oh, yeah. It's such an interesting thing because it sounds like it comes from like a natural instinct, but yet it's like a habit you have to learn to deal with. Why do you think we put so much weight into like being beautiful or desirable?
Yeah, this really, I have I believe it has a lot to do with how we're socialized, especially as women in our Western civilization. And us as women, we are socialized to be desirable, right? And if we're not desirable, then we're not good enough or we're not worthy. And you look at how women treat each other, and we do a really good job at tearing each other down because we're in competition with one another, because we want to be chosen. And then the men, they get to be the predators, right? And they get to be the choosers. And so if we're in competition with other women consistently so that we can be chosen, we're constantly trying to be somebody that somebody else wants us to be, like that man who wants us to be a certain way. So we're trying to be a certain way for them. And it really takes us out of authenticity from ourselves when we're in competition with the other women around us. You know, it's kind of like King of the Jungle, right? Like as women in this is just how our society works. We want to be the one that's chosen. We want to be the winner. And it's not like that with guys, right? They get to be the predators and they get to be the choosers. And so we are constantly in competition with girls around us, and we're tearing each other down, when it's like, when you understand why you're doing what you're doing and you can step back and be like, whoa, okay, I'm totally causing some anxiety for myself because I'm needing to prove myself, like, oh, I'm the best, or whatever we're trying to prove so that we can be chosen.
Right. You want to be the picked, the sparkly, the special and whatnot, because you feel like that gives you some kind of worth in this world. And why do, like, it's so weird. Someone else said it to me, and I've never been able to like wrap my head completely around why we do this. We see someone be beautiful and we just assume they're worthy and successful, but like looks actually don't tell us anything about like their success. But why do we put so much into, oh, they look like they have it all, so they have it all?
Yeah. And it's totally a scarcity mindset, where if we see one beautiful woman, that means that we have less beauty. And there's only so much beauty to be had. And if somebody has that beauty, then we're like, oh, there's not enough for me. Right? When in actuality, we're all beautiful in our own ways. And when we have that scarcity mindset, it's like we are grasping, and we'll constantly be grasping because there's not enough. And when we believe there's not enough, we kind of turn into crazy people a little bit.
Right. Have you seen The Glass Onion?
Yes.
Yeah, on Netflix. Like Kate Hudson is like that to Madeline Klein's character. Like she kind of like, she doesn't aggressively tear it down, but she looks at her and she's like, oh, she's young and pretty and sparkly. And, you know, she talks about how people used to see her that way, but like it's kind of ridiculous because it's Kate Hudson saying these things. And obviously she's so beautiful and, you know, has all these amazing things going for her too in her real life, and even somewhat the character in the film too, even though she turns out to be kind of horrible, but that's a whole nother thing. It's so interesting that like, we can't, you know, just be like, there's space for you and me to honestly just be. And like,
right.
How do we start to create that? How do we make that more of a space that we allow that train of thinking? You can be beautiful and I can be beautiful, and you can be successful and I can be successful.
Yeah. One, we have to like understand what is going on. And I think just understanding that, like, oh my gosh, I'm in scarcity mindset when a beautiful woman walks in, and just acknowledging, oh my gosh, she's beautiful, but that doesn't diminish my beauty too. And I'm still beautiful. The problem with, you know, not being chosen, like there would never be a problem if we're all chosen, right, Marley? Like if we get chosen all the time, great, no problem, right?
Right. But even the people who get chosen all the time, do they still have this problem, or does nobody get chosen all the time?
I just think nobody gets chosen all the time.
Great.
And I always say, you guys, even Beyonce gets cheated on. Right?
Top fact. Yeah.
Yeah. So our brains, what they do is they take the world around us and they make meaning about things. And so when we believe that we're not chosen, or when we see like, oh, we're not picked, then we take that and we make that mean something about us. All right. And that something might be like, I'm not good enough, or I should be different, or whatever it is that we make not chosen mean about us. I typically, this is my go-to thought, is like, I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. I don't have the right body. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that to myself all the time, especially in college, right? I had like the love of my life break up with me. And then I carried this narrative in my brain, like I wasn't good enough for him, or something was wrong with me. I was damaged or broken or whatever. Right. Yeah. I can
copy paste some of that for me.
Yeah. So when we're not chosen, when we're not picked, we then make that mean something in our brains, like I'm not good enough. Okay. Mm-hmm. And when we have those thoughts of I'm not good enough or I'm damaged, right? Our thoughts end up creating our feelings. And when we think thoughts, it like goes on to this chain reaction, right? And so our thoughts create our feelings. And when we think a thought like that, it makes us feel worthless or horrible or like depressed or anxious or whatever that feeling, negative feeling it is that thought creates for us. Okay. And that's why thoughts are so important, is because they create our feelings. All right. And then on this chain reaction, our feelings then create our actions. Okay. And when we feel worthless, what do we do? What are our actions? What do you do when you feel worthless, Marley?
Well, I probably tend to make the situation worse by, probably like sitting on the couch and probably scrolling on social media and continuing to like, I wallow in it. I don't really like get up and like feel like I'm strong. No, like I stay in it, and really I make the issue from like a pea size to an orange to, a water jug. It just gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And we take actions from that feeling of worthlessness, where like we sit on the couch and we grab a bag of chips, or we scroll social media. We tend to isolate. We also tend to provide evidence to help that thought be more believable for us. So our brain loves to be right. So if we're thinking a thought like I'm not good enough, then of course our brain is going to be like, oh, well, let me show you all the reasons why you're not good enough. Right. And we kind of like set ourselves up for success in believing that thought.
Right.
And so whatever actions we take, which maybe like overeating, or maybe we drink too much or whatever from the feeling of worthless, right? We then have a result from those actions. Okay. So those actions that we just listed out from feeling worthless, what do you think that result is going to be?
Like depression and anxiety.
Yeah, totally. Like depression, anxiety. The other one that I want to point out, especially from the action of isolation, is we hide ourselves, right? And whether we're like hiding internally, and we're around other people and we're just like being quiet and shutting down, but we are actually hiding. And whether we're sitting on the couch or whether we're with a bunch of group of people and we're like totally being quiet, but we tend to hide. And when we hide, we don't really get to be ourselves. And we don't get to be who we want to be in the world. And that is the biggest problem when it comes to comparison, is because of the result that it creates. Is it's creating people who are afraid to be who they are and who they want to be. And whenever you are like not able to be the person that you want to be, there is such a rub in our systems. And it's like we're screaming inside, oh, I want to be this person. Like, this is me. And then we're like, nope, you can't be that person. You're not good enough. It's like, that's a lot of anxiety, right? Yeah. Whenever we don't match up in some way, there's going to be anxiety, or there's going to be feelings that don't feel good.
Yes, I've totally felt that. The confliction of, you know, I know something is wrong because I'm not acting, you know, authentically, if you will, and you're fighting yourself, and you're literally, this is a quote from Gossip Girl, but you're like dimming your sparkle. You're literally holding yourself back from the potential of being who you really are, because you think you've spun yourself into this like spiral of thinking this way, and like the not worthy and the compare. It's almost even hard for me to put words to it, because I feel like I've gone through the cycle so many times, and at the same time I understand it and don't understand it at all, because at any stage in my life I think I'm over it and it will come back.
It's constant work. And I explain it. Well, there's a situation with, and this is just a simple situation with teens that I work with all the time, where, and if you can think back to when you were a teen, like think about like being in the classroom and somebody next to you is like, hey, let me see your answers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And like part of you is like, oh, I should be nice and share my answers with them. And then like and the other part of you is like, no, don't share your answers.
Right.
Right.
The confliction.
Like, right. I worked hard for these answers, and I don't want to give them up to somebody who's not willing to work hard. Right. And just like wants an easy ride. And so we have that confliction inside of us, and it doesn't feel good. And maybe it's not a big deal in junior high or high school to share your answers with somebody. But the thing about that is, when you abandon yourself, right? Self-abandonment, the stakes get bigger the older you get, and the stakes get higher the older you get. And you have to learn how to accept how you're feeling and love yourself, right? Even if maybe on the outside, it's not what other people want you to be doing, or people aren't okay with it. I don't know. Does that make sense? Did I explain that right?
It totally makes sense, because the confliction of being inauthentic, or, you know, not genuine, or not being your true sparkly self, whatever it may be, is going to send you into this state of like it almost feels like a lie, a falsity. And that's never going to feel as good as being your true self and dealing maybe with other people not liking it. Because I would say this to myself a lot when I was struggling with dance anxiety, when I'd go to auditions. Like, you know, I was like, okay, I have two ways to feel. I can feel really anxious in this dance audition and probably blow it, or I can give it my all and be the best self I can and then still not get it. Which one's going to feel worse? And it was to be anxious and in confliction and self-doubting. That's going to feel way, way worse than just I gave it my all and I didn't get it, because then that was like a form of self-sabotage. And I feel like it's the same with this confliction. Like you're not living your best life. You're not living your fullest potential if you don't go out there and just be who you are, despite of the compare, and, you know, creating space for other people to be that way too. It goes back to what we were saying earlier. Cause like you know, it's what you were saying about you don't want to share your test answers with somebody. And it's like, oh, if you tell another woman they're beautiful, it kind of feels like you're sharing your test answers too. It's like you're like, oh, well, if I say you're pretty and you don't think I'm pretty, then like this doesn't feel equal or whatnot. I mean, it's like a very basic example, but you know, how do we really get over this like tendency of this confliction and just like make space for other people to be just as beautiful, just authentically themselves, you too, and then not feel bad about it after?
Yeah. Such a good question.
It's a hard one.
Yeah. And I think the best answer for that is really developing our own self-confidence, because if we can learn to love ourselves, like we are our worst critics, we can learn to love other people too. And if you think about like self-confident people, they give compliments, right? Because they know their value and they know that, hey, I'm awesome, I'm amazing. And they're not afraid to tell somebody else that they're beautiful. So I think self-confidence is number one. And as we strengthen that, then we tend to not make everything be about us, because we already know, like, I'm taken care of, like, I'm good. Right. One thing I think is really, really important is when you are self-confident, you accept all the parts about you. And that means the good parts and the bad parts. And I think when it comes to social media is great. It does a lot of really great things. But when we scroll social media, we don't see the bad parts about people. And that's just how it is. That's just how social media is. Like, we put the good things on there because that's what we want people to see, and people like to see the good things. But because of that, there's like this underlying belief that happens where it's like the bad parts of me, or the parts that I'm not willing to share, those parts of me I should be ashamed of. Mm-hmm. Right? Like we tend to get this shame factor about the things that I can't share that. And so I'm not going to feel self-confident, or I'm not going to love myself because of these things. Like, these things should be kept quiet. When in all actuality, like, being self-confident means that you accept all the parts of you, right? The good and the bad. And also one of the biggest things that we don't accept about ourselves, which could be a total topic for another conversation, is our negative emotions. We have a really, really hard time accepting our negative emotions because we see on social media, like, oh, I should be happy all the time. Right. And it kind of goes back to the, like, in conflict, where when we're not happy, right, and we believe, like, oh, I should be happy all the time, but we're not happy. And it's like, wait, there's that fight again where I know I really am sad right now. And then, no, you should be happy all the time. And then we're in, like, we have discongruency again. And so that's just like one thing I also think is like, accepting your emotions in the way that you're feeling is really, really important. I feel like that's one of the best ways to accept yourself and be self-confident, is just be like, oh yeah, I'm feeling sad right now, or maybe I'm feeling anxious right now. Meaning you accept all parts of you, the good and the bad.
Right. And when you accept the good and the bad, I think it's such a place of strong standstill that, it doesn't feel like anything can make you waver. It doesn't matter, if you get that compliment or you don't, or if you give a compliment or don't, because you're so strong in how you're feeling. But I think a place I'm always curious to see what other women have to say about this is there's maybe a tendency for women to do this. When they see somebody coming up, it can be like in the career ladder or, just in life, they're coming up and they're the new, shinier, younger version. A head person can be less likely to lean a hand and help them out because there's this weird, I don't want to say jealousy, but it's this tendency of, well, I work so hard to get here, I'm not going to give a helping hand. Do you have any idea why women sometimes do that? Is it a thing? I'm just always so curious.
Yeah. Well, I think jealousy plays into that too. And yes, of course, if we're working hard, we don't want somebody to come and come and
take
steal
your
our
thing.
spot. Right. And I think men probably do that too. That's probably not just a woman thing. But I had jealousy explained to me like this. And this was so helpful for me, where jealousy, if we look at it, it's really just information about what our deepest desires are. Right. And when we think about what our deepest desires are, that never comes from like a negative place. And if we see another woman like, oh, maybe she's beautiful, or, you know, when a lot of teens I work with, they'll scroll social media and they'll be like, oh, they went and did this and I wasn't invited, right? And so when you see that and you feel jealous, like, what is your desire there? Well, your desire is connection. Your desire is to be with friends, right? And those desires aren't bad. So jealousy really is, it just shows you what are you wanting, right? And when somebody is like coming up in the ladder, right? And maybe you feel jealous, like what are you desiring? Are you desiring to, you know, be the center of attention? Right? Are you desiring to have more connection? Right? And so I think jealousy gets like a bad rap, but I think it really is a very good teacher of okay, what am I wanting here? Right? What am I wanting praise? Am I wanting validation? Right? And just helping that, letting jealousy teach you what you're wanting, what you're seeking.
Oh, I love that. I love using jealousy as a teacher. It feels like an indicator for like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking this way? You know, because yes, we do associate jealousy with very negative things. And you kind of, like you said, shut down your feelings about it. You'll be like, no, I'm not going there. You know, I'm just negative and blah, blah, blah. But like, really, if you look at it as an indicator, you can start to see and find the things you're craving in your life and not just look at it as, oh, I'm just jealous. It's like, no, what is my jealousy showing me? You know, and that is probably the healthier way to deal with the compare and, you know, the obsession with like beauty and whatnot. But the other option that's not so healthy is people will tear other people down. How do we stop that cycle?
So are you referring to like watching other people tear each other down, or like us tearing other people down?
I think us tearing other people down. Like, I mean, it doesn't have to be like exactly us, but you'll see it like other, not always, but most of the time, women will, you know, send nasty DMs to each other behind someone's back, or, you know, just be like, oh, that came so easy to her, or like, oh, she's beautiful, so she didn't work hard, or oh, she, you know, whatever. We'll say something negative to equate why they had that. And like, how do we stop doing that? When really you're just jealous?
Well, my best answer for that is to get a life coach.
Yes, that's a great answer.
And really figure out like those are all actions, right? So the DMing, the saying mean things, those are all actions that we're taking, and the actions that we take come from a feeling, right? And so figuring out, okay, what is that feeling? But then also, what is the thought that's creating that feeling that's then creating that action, right? And so us, you know, when we find that we're taking those actions of like maybe saying mean things or tearing somebody down, we got to figure out, okay, what feeling is that coming from? Maybe that feeling is coming from insecure, right? Which a lot of times it comes from insecure. And then what is that? What is insecure? What's the thought that is creating that feeling of insecurity? Like, am I thinking like I'm not good enough? Am I feeling like threatened? Am I thinking, you know, and it typically comes from a place of like not believing that you're enough, or not believing that you should be the way that you are. And I want to say that's where it comes from 90% of the time. And we have to learn how to be able to change our thoughts, think differently about ourselves, if then we're going to feel differently, and then if we're going to act differently. And so that's why the way that we think is so important, because that's where the chain reaction starts. That's where, you know, the ball starts rolling, is is the way that we think. And whenever we believe, and this is like the biggest thing, is like, you gotta be aware of your thoughts. Like as humans, we have the skill of metacognition, where metacognition is just a fancy word for, oh, I can think about what I'm thinking about. I can be aware of what I'm thinking about. And so having the skill and the ability to have awareness around what are the thoughts that are going through my brain right now? What am I thinking about myself? Oh, and then being able to catch it. Because if you stop and you start looking at the thoughts that come into our brain and the way that we actually talk to ourselves, you're going to see that we are so unkind to ourselves inside our brain, especially women. And over when I'm coaching teens, I am so surprised at like the dialogue that goes on inside their brains. And I'm like, why are you talking to yourself that way? Like you would never say that to somebody else. Right. And yet we say that to ourselves. And just being aware of that, I feel like is key, because many of us aren't even aware that we're doing it. It's just habit. And so you have to stop. You have to stop talking mean to yourself.
I think it's so interesting because I think we do talk really mean to ourselves because we think nobody's listening. But the irony is you're listening. You're listening to yourself be mean to yourself. And that's going to innately have an effect on your feelings, emotions, and thoughts, and how do you really, if you're in this negative-ish place of feeling undesirable or unworthy or uncool or not good enough, how do you take back that mindset and view yourself as worthy, desirable, and good enough?
Yeah. So one myth that we have, right? Our brains are wired for negative thinking, right? That's another reason why we've survived for so long, is because we're always looking for problems and we're always looking for issues. And so when it comes to ourselves, yes, of course, we're going to take that survival primal thinking and we're going to think about all the negative things about ourselves. And we have there's this myth, okay, that unless we're self-critical, we can't change something. So we need to be self-critical in order to change, in order to improve, in order to be different, right? And self-criticism never creates change, but we think it does. And so we can never create lasting change from self-criticism, right? Because like we're thinking bad thoughts about ourselves, then we went through that before. Then we feel worthless, and then we're on the couch, and then we don't make any changes, and we just stay where we're at, right? So I think the first thing is just like understanding that, hey, being self-critical, it never works. Beating yourself up never works. And I've seen this time and time again. And you guys probably recognize this in your own life, is like anytime that you're self-critical or beating yourself up, does it create any change? And it's like, no. The other thing is maybe we can't get to a place where we're like, oh, I'm the most beautiful girl in the world, or, oh, I have the best body. And sometimes when we make that like shift where we're like, oh, just think positive, because if we believe like I'm not good enough, right? And then we're like, oh, just believe that I'm the best in the whole world. Our brains aren't going to buy that because it's too far of a shift for us. And so I always suggest many times is just like, think neutral thoughts. One of my favorite go-to thoughts when we're talking mean to ourselves, or like maybe we're scrolling social media and we're like, oh, that picture of me is so bad, or, we don't like the way that we look, or we're beating up our body, or whatever it is like the way that I look is only 5% of who I am. Right? It's not then like telling ourselves, oh, you're so beautiful. It's just kind of reframing and shifting that to be like, oh, really? What I see in the mirror is only 5% of who I am. Right. And that's more of a neutral thought, or, like looking at yourself and being like, oh yeah, I have a body. right? My body took me to the movies today, or my body did this for me today. And starting those just small steps until you can get to the place where you want to be. But it's small. It's not like big changes overnight. And in whatever your redirect thought, it always needs to be believable. But here's the thing. Never underestimate the amazing ability that a 1% less crappy thought can have.
Mm.
All right. Like 1% less crappy. Like if that's the best you can do, then go with that, because that will take you closer and closer to where you want to be.
Yeah, don't cut yourself short. That 1% is an improvement, and it probably is making massive changes. You know, you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, you have teen daughters. And, you know, this way of thinking and mindset can be something women can pass down, you know, by hearing other women talk about other women this way. What is a way right now that we can change how we will influence the next generation in thinking about our desirability and our worth?
Oh, I love that. Such a good question. And I think that starts with me. I never talk bad about myself. I never talk bad about myself around my girls. I've always made it a habit to just not talk bad about myself. I like make mistakes, right? And I'm like, oh, that was dumb, right? But I also accept myself and my imperfections. And I show my girls that I have emotions all the time, right? But I'm very loving to myself, even if I'm having an emotion or even if I'm having a bad day. And I have made it such a habit to not talk negative about myself and not talk negative about my girls either. And this is the other biggest thing, you guys, is in not talking bad about other people, not tearing them down. And I think that starts in the home. Because if you can love yourself, you can love other people. It doesn't mean you have to be friends with them, doesn't mean you have to be neighbors with them, but you know, really creating that space where anybody can be who they are and you can still love yourself no matter what they're doing.
Coach Sami, thank you so much for being here. You have such a good pulse on the reality of dealing with the internal parts that kind of feel like they're hard to talk about because they're kind of all in our brain, but we feel them every single day. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you for having me. I feel like this work is so, so important. I wish I had it when I was younger. And yeah, I didn't have this work until I was like in my 30s. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I've been being so mean to myself.
Well, and that being said, you are a life coach for teens. Can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah. So my podcast is the Teen Life Coach Podcast. It's for teens, but really we're all just like a teen inside, right?
Yeah, duh. I'm still 16 in my brain.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So you can find me there, the Teen Life Coach Podcast. That's on all platforms. I'm on Instagram at the Teen Life Coach. And then my website is knowingup.com, knowingup.com.
Thank you guys so much for listening.